and welcome to episode 93 of Missile Industries Ford Falcon 351 project. This is another addition to the ongoing saga of power steering rack conversion woes. And in this episode I need to pull the high pressure line back out of the car, take it to a hose specialist and get them to modify it to suit the back of my pump in its current position. I've decided that the best way forward here is to pay for that hose to be professionally modified, and hopefully that gets me what I want. First things first, I need to figure out what I need to do and how I'm going to go about doing it. So the hose will need to lay a lot flatter in the engine bay than it currently does, and then I'll need to mock up some kind of pair of radiuses to suit the space I have to work with. It needs to clear the oil filter and the headers as well as possible without rubbing the hose against any part of the bodywork. So in order to help me with that, I've actually taken delivery of some more power steering parts, which I thought I could get away with not having, but in hindsight it's going to make more sense if I put these in and then go about this project rather than just wing it. So on that note, let's unpack them and see what I've got. So these are the rubber grommets for the hard lines. There they are. That's all it is. And these are used to space the hard lines apart and prevent them from rubbing on any part of the subframe when the car is in operation. So these will space my hard lines at the correct distance apart and give me an idea of where the lines are going to come up each side of the engine bay in relation to my pump and my power steering box. So my three spacing grommets are in, and I have to admit that hard line for the return hose is looking much more satisfactory now that it's sitting like that. Obviously these are trying to move their way backwards and down, but as a point of reference I think this will do. Now it's time to go and see how much modifying that front line is going to need. Now looking from above, I'm probably going to have to cut this line a fair bit shorter. I want the hard line to curve up and meet with this fitting here. There is some temptation just to put a 90-degree radius into the next fitting that goes on to this line and just terminate it straight into these fittings I've already got, but that won't attend to making that gap there bigger. Maybe I'm being overly pedantic about all of this, because realistically, no matter where I go down the side of the engine with this pipe, the proximity to the headers doesn't really get much better, whether it's down here or up here. It's still going to be, within an inch or so of those very hot pipes. So looking at my steel rule, if I keep the hose about 100 millimeters below the fitting and get a piece of steel pipe bent up and attached to my piece of high pressure hose, that might get me what I want. If I measure back to where I've put my zippy tie, that'll give me about 130 millimeters to play with between the zippy tie and the face of that high pressure pump port. Alright, it's time to draw that diagram I spoke of in the last episode. And here's the diagram. There's the fitting. Yellow zip tie line is there. Need to shorten the hose by about that much and have a new fitting crimped on. And I want a radius like that, or thereabouts. Pump, high pressure line, crimp fitting, and a bit of hard line in that shape. So that should hopefully give the hydraulic line people enough information to make my line for me. Should probably pull the line out now. Couldn't help but notice that this line here doesn't make a lot of sense. This is the low pressure hard line and it's all the way up here. So what I might do is flip that around and see if it makes more sense sitting the other way. This makes much more sense. Stumbling blindly through the path of classic car power steering installations has led me to the light. Okay, so those lines both make sense now. They both clear the headers because I didn't have the low pressure line far enough around to the passenger side. So that makes sense. I'll come over to the passenger side. The line is sticking up there into space where I can drop a hose onto it. I don't know what that means for all my measurements at this end for the high pressure line, but we'll redo them all. I'm starting to think I'm going to have even more hose to chop off. Possibly not. Yeah, the fitting's above the cross member. Time to drop the ruler down here again. So it appears I'm going to be removing even more hose. I guess that makes sense since this is a 6-cylinder power steering line and the power steering pump would have been far further forward in the engine bay. After considerable rigmarole, both the lines are out again. So next thing to do is take this hose here to the hose shop and I'll pick this up in another couple of days' time. Update time. The hose has come back from the hose shop. They've done what I've requested, and obviously when you do these things it can be a bit hit and miss, but we'll see how it all works out and see if I've got the clearance that I need. I do have a backup plan in mind because they've actually threaded a fitting onto this hard line here that I could put a whole bunch of dash 6 fittings onto and Teflon lines if this fails me this time, even though I've spent a fortune getting it done. But first things first, we'll see if it fits. And there is the power steering hard line mounted, and as you can see it's probably actually worse off than it was on the output port compared to my Aeroflow fitting setup. But the good news is the line is well down out of the way. So at this stage I'm going to go with it and see how it all plays out once it's all plumbed up. I might be tempted to put some heat shielding over that because it is literally millimeters away from the exhaust manifold. I'm not thrilled about that, but there's a lot of hot things in this engine bay that are close to lots of other hot things, so like brake lines for example. So let's just see how this all goes. I guess what I should do now is just put this power steering box in and go full send and see if it actually works once it's all together and hot, and see what happens, because the car's been sitting on axle stands now for weeks and I'd like to drive it while the weather's still a bit cool. I don't know how much longer that's going to last, but this is the start of October, so I need to get cracking. But before I get any further, I'm going to go to Supercheap Autos and buy some stuff, much to the horror of my children who have to come with me. And we're back from Supercheap Autos. I've got 2 litres of the most poverty spec power steering fluid that's, I believe, Dex 3 compatible. I've got just over a metre of power steering hose return line. It even says power steering return line right on the hose. And some hose retaining clamps, which I'm going to hopefully combine with these to anchor onto the subframe, because if I bought the Ford specific ones it practically doubled the price of these through rear spares. So $5.99 well spent. Yes, dash 6 fitting backup plan. you can't pay someone to do the job you want, figure out a way to do it yourself.